Welcome to this session, everybody. We are here at the Europeana 2025 conference with a session called Standardizing, Shaping and Empowering the Future of Digital Preservation. My colleague Eula will look after you in the chat. We would like to invite you to add any questions to the chat so that we can put them to our speakers. We have two really interesting talks for you, so without further ado, I will hand over to the first one. Francisco José Valentín Ruiz, over to you.
Okay, in our case, it starts Amanda. So, yes.
Francisco, can you share? Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Amanda, and today I'll be presenting the work carried out together with my colleagues Francisco José Valentín, Ruiz, and María García González on standardizing preservation plans based on eArchiving for digital cultural heritage. So I'll begin the presentation and then hand over to Francisco José. After that, we'll be happy to open for any questions or discussion. We'd like to thank Europeana for offering this valuable space for exchange and critical reflection. And let's get started. Okay, so when we hear about digital preservation, it's quite common to be thinking of images from digitization processes, for example, being stored in devices such as hard disks, LTO tapes, online repositories connected to the cloud, in order to guarantee the preservation of those images, with one of the priorities being the ability to disseminate the content more widely, for example, through Europeana. In these cases, as the original document is supported through a physical medium, sometimes it could happen that the preservation of the digital objects is not seen as a highest priority, because one holds on to the idea that these copies could be obtained later on if needed. So what happens if we change the time perspective though? That is, if we look now into the distant future, let's say 20, 50, 100 years from now, is it possible that digitized images may become perhaps the only copy available and therefore more relevant than ever? What if the original carriers have degraded or disappeared by then? And if we instead focus on born digital heritage content, how should preservation measures be applied if we want them to be accessible and understandable in 100 years from now? So this is the task those of us in the field of long-term digital preservation are assigned with. Fortunately, there are standard preservation models, such as the OAIS from ISO 14721, which you probably already know, and whose system looks similar to this, okay? So we have here preservation planning, management, and we can't talk about the whole functioning of this system today. So we will focus on the preservation planning part of it, and also the management of digital content in the forms of the three information packages, which is the submission information package, SIP, the archival information package, the AIP, and the dissemination information package, the DIP, okay? So what is preservation planning? It is an activity aimed at ensuring that the archived material remains accessible and understandable in the long term, even if the computer systems we use for management become obsolete, original formats and versions are no longer supported, or the context for understanding the information is not widely available anymore. The result of this activity is documented in a preservation plan. So the preservation plan will document the processes that happened and the ones that are set to happen. Over the next sections, we're going to have a quick look at the proposal to standardize it using this block modeling technique. But first, let's define the framework we're using. So we already mentioned the OAIS model. Let's talk about the eArchiving initiative. So what is the eArchiving initiative? The eArchiving initiative is an action of the European Commission Digital Europe program. Its goal is to provide specification, software training, knowledge to help organizations, public and private, to manage the digital preservation challenge. So eArchiving is entirely based on the OAIS model, and it will define further the further structure of these information packages that we mentioned before. Okay, so our proposal aims at creating a standard for the preservation plan that can be framed within these models, the OAIS and the eArchiving model. This can provide a much more complete model for documenting the preservation plan and a very powerful guidance tool for cultural institutions to create their own customized version of preservation models. Okay, so let's talk about how to standardize it. As we've seen, the importance of preservation planning and the preservation plan as a tool to document activities lies in the conceptual definition of the whole preservation system. So all activities that are defined and implemented around preserved information must be defined in the preservation plan and planned within the system as a whole. So while we can only touch briefly on the elements that make up the preservation plan, we do want to present a general scope of what this standardized preservation plan would include. So first, let's start with organizational aspects, okay? So these are the key to establishing a preservation system that exists not only on paper. Here we would need to identify who within the organization is responsible for carrying out each preservation related activity. So while we may think that only a few people are involved directly or indirectly, virtually everyone in an organization could have some preservation related role. So let's suppose the knowledge associated with the restoration process, digitization process, the legal normatives, the way the documentation or asset is processed, all of these make up a set of very valuable information that these agents are the most informed on. At the same time, making these agents aware of the importance of their knowledge and involving them in the process of compiling this knowledge is also key. So we recommend a block that will assign these responsibilities to different duty bearers with different levels of authorization and permission. Moving on to producer archive agreements. So to clarify, in OAIS terms, producer is the institution that holds all of the original elements that will form a submission information package, and the archive is the system that will ensure the long-term preservation functioning. So the agreement in this sense is closely related to organizational aspects mentioned beforehand and ties in directly with the eArchiving structure. Why? Well, because how the original content will be provided is something that must be agreed upon. So what is the structure of the submission package? With what descriptive metadata, with what context information, with which structure it will be sent to the preservation model. So eArchiving initiative provides us with a number of tools in this regard. It provides a structure that is what we're seeing on the screen right now. However, this standard that changes a little bit for each line of work may not cover all preservation needs for all institutions. That's why we recommend including the structure package for each information typology and documenting any specific changes that may be necessary or any additional relevant information. So for example, let's go through 3 brief examples. First, bibliographic heritage. So this is a tremendously standardized environment with descriptive tools such as Mark 21 or BibFrame having a place in the descriptive structure. So this could be included in the eArchiving structure that we see here. Another example would be for assets that conform complex media, for example, artwork installations. We could need further throughout guidelines on how to to reproduce the conditions, the original conditions of the installation for installation artworks or time-based media in general. So this contextual information could be included not only on the metadata, but also in the documentation that we see below here. You could include further specifications for how to do them. And lastly, for administrative heritage documentation. So documentation that goes through e-government environments that could be associated with more complex administrative contexts. You could have to specify, for example, the government digital signatures involved, the legal normatives, and specifying how that is passed on into the package. So that would be relevant to include in the producer archive agreements so that we know what is being sent initially. Following that, we can move on to the AIP conversion. So this submission package needs to be converted into an AIP package. That is also something that should be documented in the plan if there are any specificities, just as the section we mentioned before, the submission information package. Following that, we could have a risk assessment and control block that would include, for example, digital file formats in use, technological infrastructure threats, legal compliance, contextual documentation. So it is advisable for each of these risks to set a time frame for reviews and also specify responsibilities, which is connected to the first block that we mentioned. Moving on more closely to the technological aspects. So although technology alone is not enough to ensure digital preservation, technological aspects are of course key to achieving any long-term conservation and access goals. So in such changeable technological environment, it would be relevant to include a block that will detail the links between the preservation system or the software that's being used and the production and management systems to adequately detail what is in use and the process for technologically evolving this system in the long run. Moving on with access and dissemination. So the OAIS model proposes a third type of exchange package, which is the dissemination information package, to transfer digital objects and the necessary information to a user to consult. This would also be relevant information to include in the preservation plan. So how it is, what is the architecture for these packages? And lastly, the outsourcing. So to finish with an explanation of the most relevant blocks one should include, very often an institution needs to outsource one or more tasks related to digital preservation through specialized providers of technological solutions, conversion services, etc. This is possible in digital preservation as long as these responsibilities of the providers are correctly identified. The services and software are adequately described and processes are guaranteed to ensure the continuity of the preservation system, even if the provider may disappear or may be replaced by a different provider. So these are some layout of these blocks. And now I'm going to pass the word to my colleague, Francisco José Valentín, to offer a couple of examples.
Thank you, Amanda. So hello, everyone. And thank you your attendance and for allowing us to participate. Some examples of blocks and construction of a preservation plan from questionnaires. As we don't have time to detail all the blocks, we have selected some examples to illustrate our proposal. In the case of the organizational aspects, at least we include in the preservation plan a discrete table defining the agents in a personal base and institutional base with full contact information as a minimum. The possibilities of responsibility roles are laid out in the OAIS standard. This allows the preservation plan to serve as a self-reflecting tool, as well allowing the organization to evaluate their own organigram and staffing to make sure that there are enough personnel and resources being directed at this planning. So in the block producer archive agreement, as we have explained, it refers to the requirements that by mutual agreement are established by the producer and the archive, although it is the least automatable part, because often they may be specific requirements. We have been able to establish a series of classes. You can see some examples here, but since they are similar, I will only explain one of them. We have highlighted here, for example, some changes in each of them, so you can see the differences. I explain, for example, bibliographic heritage one. It the preservation plan must include metadata schemas used and documentation on their characteristics. For example, if markers XML is used for descriptive metadata or METS rights for property rights, the structure of the submitted documents, for example, EPUB or other types, the structure of the package, the relationships of the package with its creation context, the context, the additional information a user will need to interpret the content. Other special characteristics, for example, in administrative documentation is digital signatures, or in the case of books, intellectual property rights or similar, and the minimum validation that must be carried out to ensure that the criteria are met. So this is another example, so we don't have many time. So in the case of the archival information package creation, the creation from the submission packages, as we have said, it is about detailing the conversion process in the preservation plan. It's similar, only change the content, but it's similar for all types. So at least the preservation plan should contain evidence on the validation process. It includes technical elements such as verification of document formats and versions. This is very, very important. Treatment given to metadata for package transformations, because in many cases metadata contains information about the preservation of the documents. Operations with digital objects, for example, conversions, and documentation of the package structure itself. In the case of risks, as a minimum, a table of formats and versions identified within the institutions should be a standard block to be contained in the construction of the preservation plan. And we have to constantly update it. For video files, for example, it could be relevant to document which video codecs are in use or have been used in the past in the files by the institution. And another things, plain treatment according to the format version, identified risk, technological, organizational, contextual, and types of treatment for each identified risks. Related to technological aspects, I won't talk much about this topic here because we are already mentioned it above. We must identify the technological elements that make up the system, the preservation software and the support software, such as the database, the storage system that can be local, cloud, physical, or a mixture of several of them, and also the physical hardware elements whose characteristics and obsolescence must be described. In many cases, compliance with additional security criteria, like this. Or local in Spain, we have our local standard of security. Access and dissemination. The main conceptual and general aspect of the dissemination information packages architecture is the possibility to adapt to the different user characteristics and needs. Examples of dissemination packages policies could be sensitive data and metadata control, user access permission roles, etc. So here there are many. And finally, the questionnaire model for creating the preservation plan. What we want to show with this research project, to which we have dedicated many years of work, is that the set of elements that make up a preservation plan is finite. In this way, we have the ability to define and delimit the elements that make up each block, so that we can be reused by any institution that wants to design its plan. The ideal, our perfect proposal would be to create an open online website, for example, with this or a repository, open repository, with these predefined categories and descriptions for the different elements. So the institutions can reuse this. And in conclusion, we have 5 main conclusions. The importance of preservation plans. We have tried to convey that the preservation plan and its detailed description in the preservation plan are fundamental to ensure the long-term conservation of documentation. We have also highlighted some of the key blocks. This is one. The evolution of eArchiving to create preservation plans, one of the shortcomings of current standards such as eArchiving, is that they don't tell us anything about how to build a preservation system. They tell us how the different types of packages should be structured, but we have seen preservation is not just about packages. Towards an open and shared repository that allows composing a preservation plan, the proposal that we do of an open repository about these blocks and the content is very important to make easily a preservation plan. And AI usage. Furthermore, if we have a well-structured repository, the possibilities of improving preservation plan creation processes with AI technology should be explored, because they can make processes more efficient. We have not yet been able to advance in this regard. This is a research line. And finally, preserving the preservation plan, advantages and disadvantages of including in the archival information packages. Finally, a question related to the preservation of information from the preservation plan. Where do we preserve the preservation plan? It may sound like a funny question, however, this may be a source of controversy when defining a long-term architectural reference for all this package to exist together. On our experience, the main recommendation we have built is to create an archival information packages for the preservation plan, and that is attached to all others. That way avoiding having a copy, the increasing storage space requirements, and the updates of the archival packages. So this is an issue that requires further research. And probably the final conclusion is we have opened more lines of research that we have closed. So this is all. Thank you very much. If you have questions, we are ready for us.
Thank you so much. That was an absolutely packed presentation there from both of you. So much technical information, so much detail. And so whilst the attendees, please pop your questions in the chat and we can put them to our speakers. I'd like to ask if you were going to summarize all of that. There was one thing you wanted people to take away about your work. What would it be?
Okay,
Amanda, please.
Yeah, Amanda, yes.
So I believe the summed up message here would be that it's possible to have a model for preservation plans. Sometimes when we talk about building a preservation plan, it can generate a lot of confusion related to where to start and what to include. And the idea is that although preservation plans will always be by nature custom made, they need to be personalized for each institution. It is possible to build models that will help in this first step of defining the first architecture and then going deep and doing the personalizations that are required for each institution.
Do you agree? Or you have anything else to add to that? Valentín?
I think that would be it. Would you like to add something to my?
No, I think your answer is perfect. So it's a long work for many years to make that conclusions. So I think many institutions can reuse this knowledge, and we work together because in many cases we don't have time to think about digital preservation, and we need to reuse the information and the knowledge. And I think our work is on this basis, and this is our proposal.
Yes, like building on the knowledge and research that has been previously done, yes, by others. Totally.
Yeah. And speaking of research, you mentioned that you have opened up many more research lines and closed them again than you can continue with. And you also very briefly mentioned AI, and that was an area of interest and research. I wondered if you could expand a little bit on the effect that AI has already had or could possibly have, or your worries or your hopes for it. How do you see AI interacting with your work?
Okay. There are an advantage of the AI that if we have work with predefined blocks and very well structured blocks, the AI is a good tool to make a preservation plan. But I think, we think that we need that blocks. If you try to do a preservation plan without that, we think that the result is probably won't be good, specifically by the needs of an institution. And this is the way of research that we propose. Use the AI tools, but over the basis of a knowledge base into these blocks to make a preservation plan.
Amanda, anything to add?
No, I believe that that's a good answer to sum up.
Excellent. I know that the audience might be waiting for our next advertised speaker in this session. I'm afraid we don't appear to have our speaker here. We have been having some problems with Zoom, so I don't know whether that's the issue or not. But we'll keep chatting amongst ourselves here, and if we have time, we will squeeze in the speaker. But I think that it might just be us. So I also wondered if you two have anything you'd like to ask the audience here. We've got 44 people listening to you, so I'm sure they're all willing to answer any questions that you might have for them about their, I don't know, their interest in preservation plans, or I don't know, anything you guys might like to ask them. It's an opportunity to do so. We can use the chat there as well. I don't know if anything springs to mind or I put you on the spot there, but have a little think. And yeah, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about sort of how to follow your work and your progress, or how people can keep up with you, or what's happening next that our audience can get involved with or follow or benefit from.
Probably we publish this, so it's public in a few months, and our work will be public for all. So in a few months we work with specific publications of that.
Okay. Is there a website that people can go to look to make sure they're signed up for notifications? Or
No,
nothing
but
like that.
our contacts are public. If any people are interested in our work, we are delighted to share with them the information. So it's no problem. The website is not created but in the future, probably in a few months.
Excellent. I had a nice question from my colleague Eula, actually, which is, do you already have example institutions that have applied your model? Have you seen it work in practice?
Amanda?
Yes, yes, we have worked with many institutions in Spain and internationally, building these questionnaires and these plans through Odilo, which is a provider of software for archive, but specifically dealing with this previous part, so this consulting part of really understanding what each institution needs, like what is their context, what are their needs, and what they actually are prioritizing to preserve, because that is another question. Institutions, sometimes you don't need, or you don't want to preserve everything that you have, so you need to make a choice to correctly invest your efforts and your resources. So we have been working with institutions in that sense, and yeah, so but the main goal here is also to share a bit more these tools that we have been using to empower institutions to be able to work with these tools as well, because we know that this is going to be more and more a global preoccupation, a global theme that all institutions will need to think about. So smaller institutions, bigger institutions like governmental institutions or private institutions, all of them will need to be reflecting on that, and are reflecting on that already. So the idea is to kind of offer some of these tools for them to begin experimenting with them, perhaps, and developing them in an independent way as well. Yeah.
Brilliant. And you mentioned there about having to make decisions about what should be preserved and what comes first. I just wondered, what are your perspectives on that? If you could categorize things, what do you think is the highest priority of heritage and culture that should be preserved first, or needs to be preserved first? It's a hard question, I know.
Yeah. Priority. It depends on the kind of institution. In many cases, probably is the situation of the repositories, and for example, in archival context, in archival institutions, many important thing is the context of the information, and in bibliographic institutions is the not the context, the content itself. So depends on the institution and the characteristics, and there are many institutions that have been working with preservation for many years, at least related with digital objects and storage, cloud storage, and that. And this is not the problem, but the problem is related with the conversions of old formats and versions and that. And in other case, the institution never work with digital preservation, so they need to start with the preservation plan and in the conceptual treatment of the digital preservation. So depends on the institution and the characteristics and their work in the past with preservation. So it's a bit difficult question, and the answer depends on the institution.
Yeah, of course. Amanda, do you have anything to add?
Well, I would add that, going on the same line as Francisco, that sometimes it's useful to advise institutions to start by where they feel like they're able to start, just so that they can learn through the process of through the exercise of doing it. So sometimes that is useful to even begin to understand what you actually want to preserve or not, because it's when you're still in the theoretical part of it, sometimes it's quite difficult to have a grasp of what it entails. And also sometimes in this era of information that we are in, we have so much information, so much content. Sometimes it's quite difficult for institutions to even know what they have within them. So that's why maybe starting small and starting by where you feel like you're able to is a good first step.
Yeah, it's a great.
And in many cases, there are informational documents that are in a very high risk of lost. So this is the priority, the main priority, and it's very common that this circumstance, especially in the administrative and administrative context, is very usual that the all database is in high risk of lost, and this is to start with preservation, that is a good aspect to.
Yes, the risk.
Yes,
exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. I think it's clear that there's an awful lot of work to be done, and your tools are hopefully a really good starting point for institutions to approach this and to not have to reinvent everything themselves every time. So that's hugely valuable for the sector. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, and thank you for talking to me for longer than you were probably expecting to. And I'm sorry to the audience that we didn't get our second speaker. We will end our session here, and those of you who are following the rest of the conference, I think they are sort of almost back on track time-wise, so the schedule should be as you see it from now on. I think they're all going off for a coffee break in Warsaw next. So I hope that wherever you are, you can grab a nice cup of coffee, or maybe it's even a glass of wine time somewhere soon. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you have a good rest of the conference. Thank you very much to our speakers again for joining us. And we wish you all very well, and see you somewhere else soon. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.